Hello everybody and welcome back to the Overlap Breakdown channel. This week we're here today to cover everything we learned from Manchester United 0, Arsenal 1. Okay, so I've just finished watching the game this Sunday night and we've got a few things that we want to cover just in terms of the general takeaways from the game, both in favour of Arsenal, in favour of Manchester United, things that both teams could work on. And we're going to try and get through this very fast because we've got a lot of things to say about both teams across this 90 minutes played. So we're definitely going to start off with Arsenal's sort of set-piece mastery and their dark arts and game management throughout this game. The game was decided again by a set-piece for Arsenal. 1-0, clean sheet. It's become also familiar now with Arsenal. But I wanted to talk to you about the way Arsenal actually set up their set piece on the corner goal, which was having 5 roamers outside of the penalty area, and then they're running into set zone markers on a set play, which are players who are basically covering and defending areas in terms of the box that are actually zones, they're not men. So you can imagine if there's players rooted to the spot, they're carrying their momentum and they're attacking the loose ball in the air with all their momentum. And obviously they have a player stood on the keeper to pin him, and Arsenal goals from corners since the start of the 23-24 season. They have 31. The second best in the Premier League during that time is Liverpool, who are 11 behind Arsenal. To make matters even worse for Manchester United in terms of how they defended this corner, Manchester United have conceded the most goals from corners in that time as well, with 23, and Nottingham Forest being the second worst with 20. So it's definitely an area that Arsenal would have worked on leading up to the game. They had a plan, they executed it, and it was brilliant. But I want to move on now into sort of the dark arts about Arsenal. And a lot of people don't like this term because it's very, a negative connotation. People don't like football teams doing this. But personally, for me, I'm all about my team winning. And if this helps my team win football matches, especially if I was an Arsenal fan, I could understand. Arsenal committed 19 fouls against Manchester United today. Only in 2 of Mikel Arteta's 212 Premier League games in charge of the club have they committed more. And I actually want to further put this on into another stat that I've got, which shows that last season, Arsenal had the joint most bookings for time wasting with Chelsea last season in the Premier League. And in this match, they had 2 players booked for doing that exact thing, which was Jurriën Timber and David Raya. Again, you can put this down to Arsenal being negative, but personally for me, they are winning football matches by doing the dark arts, and that is a thing that, I truly believe is in the game. Game management, I think that they time the subs really well, but the fouls in terms of, on the foul map that we just brought up before, the fouls in the centre of the pitch to actually stop Manchester United getting momentum in the game. I think around the 75th minute when Cunha was starting to get touches on the balls, they were just timing the fouls very, very well, and it took the sting out of the game. There was one moment where Ben White went down in the penalty area. We couldn't get him off the floor, and it just took all the momentum out of the game for United, and probably partly the reason why Manchester United couldn't ever build up to that climax of breaking Arsenal down. And it was 1-0 Arsenal, clean sheet, set piece once again, and I'm sure Mikel Arteta would have been perfectly fine with that. So we're actually going to move on into the second thing we want to talk about, which was something a bit different that we were actually noticing with Arsenal. So if you can imagine that the blue team's Arsenal, I think in open play, we were actually seeing Zubimendi drop into almost these half-back positions, and that was splitting both the central defenders. And what this meant was when they get forward, so we can imagine that both the fullbacks are pushed forward, and the midfielders are between the lines here, it meant that Declan Rice and Martin Ødegaard had almost these freer roles. And Martin Ødegaard has played this role last season under Mikel Arteta, where he's more responsible for controlling in front of the back line. Now what we've got is Martin Zubimendi, who's very, very comfortable picking the ball up here, but can play here and play nice horizontally, keep the tempo going. I think Manchester United couldn't really jump out when Arsenal got up the pitch with their possession. And I think it left them a bit, concerned as to who to jump on, especially with Declan Rice and Martin Ødegaard sort of floating around. Now, another thing that they actually changed, not entirely, we've seen this a lot last season, I think we even covered it on the channel, was the width-holding fullbacks from Arsenal. So in the first half, we've seen Ben White and Ricardo Calafiore, the width holders in Arsenal's attacking shape, which meant that Bukayo Saka and Gabriel Martinelli were playing much more of these half-space roles. And even though Calafiore is very good at sort of coming inside, similar to Miles Lewis-Skelly, he actually found a lot of his time spent up holding the width. And I think this is something that Arsenal fans have been talking about for a couple seasons now in terms of reinventing these flying fullbacks, just like Manchester City, just like Liverpool, just like PSG, just like all the other best teams in Europe. And I think it's an interesting one for me because I still prefer Calafiore sort of making these bulldozer-like movements into the box from this half-space position. but it's definitely something that Arsenal tried a lot more in this game for me. I think in the second half when Jurriën Timber come on, he was actually making a lot of bursting runs on the outside of Saka, which we have seen a lot from Arsenal, but I wonder if we could actually see sort of an evolution in terms of Saka and Martinelli getting closer to their centre forward. Moving on into the third section now, which is going to be about Matheus Cunha and Bryan Mbeumo's debuts. Now, in the first half, we actually saw Diogo Dalot maintain this right wing back position, which was a surprise to me. I thought it was going to be Amad Diallo, but it meant that Bryan Mbeumo actually had an outside runner, so he was often finding Dalot actually making these somewhat, overlapping runs just naturally. So that meant he had a combination with the right wing back, which worked very well for him. And we've actually got his touch map on the screen now, which shows sort of the similar sort of patterns as to what we expected of him last season, which is a lot of wide touches. And then as he creeps towards the box, can we get him inside into the dangerous pockets of space? We actually saw Amad Diallo when he come on that he was much more the width holder. We mentioned this in the Mbeumo piece. We want them to constantly be rotating, and we're yet to see if that connection can really start to gel. But I hope that Bryan Mbeumo is actually to go out wide a lot more and have some of them looping crosses in, because I think in the last 15 minutes we somewhat lacked that final killer ball that we could play over the top of Arsenal, especially when Benjamin Sesko come on. And now we're going to speaking about probably my man of the match, which was actually Matheus Cunha. Cunha completed all final third passes. He had 11 out of 11 final third passes. Every single one of them made it to its target. He was being given a lot more license to drop into midfield. And what we've often noticed about Manchester United is in build-up, we don't want these two pocket tens very, very high. We don't want them far away from the ball. We want them to become a bit deeper. Now, one of Matheus Cunha's best attributes is actually his ability to pick the ball up here and drive through the opposition. And when Benjamin Sesko come on and he actually rotated into the 10s where he's going to play, hopefully, for the rest of the season for Manchester United, we saw even more of them long stretching dribbles through Arsenal's midfield. Even when he started the game in the first half, he had that one mazy dribble that led to a shot, which was a bit weak considering he ran 60 yards of the pitch. But he had that emotion and he played the game with somewhat of that grittiness and that robustness that I think Manchester United fans are really going to get behind. I think he was getting the crowd up on one corner, I remember, just the way he carries the ball. He looks really scrappy, but some of his touches, some of his link-up, some of his hold-up, some of his passing work is absolutely brilliant. I think Manchester United have always loved somewhat of a volume ball carrier, someone who can get the ball, take it to another destination, sprint fast, speed up the play. And I think under Ruben Amorim, it's something that we've not really had too much in these areas. It's often been Casemiro, Ugarte, Bruno Fernandes, Kobbie Mainoo, who is more of a central dribbler, but he looks out of favour at the moment. So when Matheus Cunha is dropping into these midfield spaces, he's actually breaking lines and, upping the tempo for Manchester United on the ball, on the turn, getting the ball here, driving, and really starting to up the speed of everything. And I think that's what this Manchester United team needs. It needs someone who can accelerate the tempo, not just on the ball passing it, but can we break lines with carries, passes? Can we get to the opposite end of the pitch very fast? Can we make them transitional moments stick? And he, for me, was Manchester United's best outfielder today. Now, moving on into the second to last section, which is going to be if Manchester United really did look better than last season. There's been a little bit of a debate online as to whether or not Manchester United actually deserve to get more out of the game. And whilst I possibly think that's the case, there are arguments for and against that Manchester United did improve. I really did like the look of Manchester United in this opening game. I thought they were sharper. I thought they were more physically competitive. I thought in terms of going from one end to the other when the opportunities was on, I felt the transition quality was really good. I thought we fought for second and first balls a lot better than we did last season. But regardless of that, Ruben Amorim has now lost 15 of his 28 Premier League games, winning the other 7 and drawing 6. This is the fastest a manager has reached 15 defeats in the competition without taking over a newly promoted team in that period, since Paul Hart with Portsmouth in 2009. It is very bad reading for Ruben Amorim, and I know that the result is what really matters, but I had to take notice of Manchester United's overall performance in this game. Arsenal created only 0.29 XG in open play in comparison to Manchester United's 1.35, albeit coming from 22 shots, so it's a very low value for the amount of shots that Manchester United have had. But I do really want to hone in on what made Manchester United look a little bit better in this game, in my opinion. About 7 minutes into the game against Arsenal, they had their first dead goalkeeper kick. So this was the first moment we could see Manchester United in a Premier League game. How were they going to press? Now, In the Fiorentina game in pre-season, the one that was leading up to this Arsenal game, we actually reverted a little bit more to that 5-2-3 and gambling with these 3 forwards like this, with only 2 pivot players in the middle. So you can imagine this is how Manchester United were actually playing against build-up against Fiorentina. So we can imagine these are 2 pivot players sat on here, and there's an extra player sort of roaming in between the lines. And this is always a problem for Manchester United, because it means that this player usually has to pin there. That means this player has to drop back, and it's very hard to apply consistent pressure on the ball. Now, the change that Ruben Amorim actually made in this game, which I thought was a very, very good one, and we've seen it throughout pre-season, was sort of this idea that we can move to a 4-4-2 out of possession. But quite interestingly, it was Mason Mount and Bryan Mbeumo leading the press for Manchester United. And in the 7th minute, which was Arsenal's first dead goalkeeper kick, we forced David Raya long through the goalkeeper kick. And I know Arsenal do that a lot, but we have now got Casemiro, De Ligt, who they're launching up to, and they won a vast majority of the knockdowns. And it meant that Manchester United could regain the ball, win the first, win the second, and then set possession to go again. And I think just in general, looking at sort of the landscape of the Premier League, if we're going to be consistently and reliably applying pressure on teams' build-ups with this 4-4-2, whether or not we force them long, if we don't force them long and they want to play, we've now got Bryan Mbeumo, Mason Mount, Matheus Cunha, Bruno Fernandes, Patrick Dorgu, Diogo Dalot, who are very, very good off-the-ball workers. So overall, did Manchester United look better in this game than they did through the entire of last season? Yeah, quite drastically, actually. If we take a look at the data analysis that we've got here, which is the average data return under Amorim in the 24-25 season in comparison today. Now, I know it's a very small sample size going off today, but take into the fact that this is one of the Premier League's favourites for the title and where Manchester United did finish last season. So we can see that the fast break, shots from fast breaks, total shots, shots on target, touches in the box, passing accuracy, everything on this chart in front of me is up. Now, I did think that Manchester United held the ball really well. I thought sometimes the temperament was off. I think when Bruno Fernandes got it, he wanted to go a little bit too direct. And I did think for as many shots and as high as the XG actually is over the course of the game, I don't think we created any clear-cut opportunities. Now, that could be obviously put down to a lack of a focal point until Benjamin Sesko come on, but also in terms of when we got to the final third, we just didn't really know how to fashion any, clear-cut opportunities, especially against a defensive block like Arsenal. Now, I'm not sure whether or not this will be a consistent problem throughout the season. I think there's enough in Bryan Mbeumo, Cunha, Sesko, Amad Diallo, Bruno Fernandes to create chances. But one thing that did strike me in that game was even in the last 10 minutes, it did feel like we're a little bit, can we go and launch a ball into the box for Harry Maguire, who we've just put on? I just felt like there could have been a little bit more of a swifter solution. I thought the transitions in the first half are where we were more dangerous. And that could actually be why Arsenal chose to sit off completely in the second half, because the amount of fast breaks we actually had in this game and the amount of shots from fast breaks we had in this game. So maybe that was the reason why Arsenal decided to sit in more of that mid to low block and not actually put too much pressure on Manchester United's build-up. And just to add to what I've just said about Arsenal potentially sitting a bit deeper and a bit lower because they were scared of Manchester United's transitional threat. 4 shots from fast breaks for Manchester United today, 2 for Mbeumo, 1 for Cunha, 1 for Dorgu, which is the most out of any team this weekend and their most in any league game under Ruben Amorim. So whether or not Manchester United pinned Arsenal back or whether or not Arsenal chose to sit back because they were scared of Mbeumo, especially Sesko when he come on, and Cunha making them long darts into the final third behind the defensive line when Arsenal's fullbacks went forward, more importantly, maybe they were more scared of that and that's why they sat deep. And I think when they went a little bit deeper into the box, whilst we had a lot of touches there, and I think there was a lot of last-ditch blocks from Arsenal as well, Manchester United never really created a clear-cut opportunity for someone to hit one or scrap one into the back of the net. It was very, very itchy and scratchy, but for definite, it was 100% an improvement on last season in terms of the overall, feel of the game. And now moving on into our final section of today's video, which is actually going to be looking at both teams' centre forwards. Obviously, Benjamin Sesko only played 30 minutes, but I'm going to cover him off very, very quickly. And barely had any involvement in the game whatsoever. He had 1 or 2 link-up moments, which one of them fell to Ugarte, which he shot into the stands. But he had a couple touches in the opposition box, which were back to goal and a bit scrappy. But it was actually his off-the-ball movement. Now, We mentioned in our piece when covering that he was doing too much of this coming towards the ball. Instead of actually coming towards the ball and being attracted to it, he was making them diagonal runs across the face of defences, like we were saying. So if you can imagine, this is Benjamin Sesko, and this line is very compact across the back four here. What he was doing was making sort of diagonal runs, which are so unpredictable and so hard to actually stop. So we can imagine that Arsenal are in that defensive shape like this. He was making sort of starting a little bit to the right and then diagonally moving inside. And this was happening somewhat in the halfway line, but it was something that in my mind, against high lines and when going long, especially with his aerial threat, I think some of these runs and some of these runs were really, really dangerous. And I think that's going to be something where we look out for Benjamin Sesko, because even though he had next to no involvement in the overall game coming towards the ball, I did notice some of them movements off the shoulder, which I didn't really have too much to work with at Leipzig because he was so ball dominant. So very interesting sign to Manchester United fans, because that was one of my big criticisms of him. Now moving on into the man who actually played an hour in the game, which was Victor Gyokeres. He completed his debut but saw him have 0 shots, create 0 chances for his teammates and complete just 4 passes in 60 minutes. And if we actually put up his touch map on the screen here, we can see that he's only really had 1 or 2 touches in the box, with a lot of touches sort of coming outside of the centre line, which was something we highlighted massively when he was at Sporting. And whether or not this is an issue where maybe Arsenal have to use him better or Gyokeres has to get used to Arsenal better, we don't know. But as we mentioned in that piece, Victor Gyokeres is very much a channel runner. This is where his qualities show. His running in these channels, his combination play, his actual runs into these areas here for these cutbacks. He actually had one here which saw him like double hit the ball and he got his foot rooted in the floor. But yeah, in terms of looking physically sharp, I didn't really notice him dominating Matthijs de Ligt an awful lot, to be honest, which is obviously someone who's just started his first game. I don't believe he's had any pre-season, actually, apart from the 1 or 2 games he maybe played for Arsenal. So he's a very, very fresh face in the team. But I think you notice sort of the physicality difference when Kai Havertz come on. He actually plucked a few balls out of the air. But I think this is something that Arsenal are going to have to get used to. I actually thought he would have a very, very good second half, but he only stayed on for 15 minutes because United were playing very, very high in Arsenal's half, and that meant that he actually had space in behind to run into. And I thought that, with Ødegaard, who made a couple errors on the breaks, but was probably the guy who was leading them transitions, I thought Ødegaard, Bukayo Saka, Victor Gyokeres sort of spinning into the channels, maybe pulling de Ligt into these wider areas. I thought Arsenal could have used someone like that, but that wasn't really the case. He got taken off after 15 minutes, and it was somewhat of a tough debut for him, but I don't really think he's going to struggle too much sort of in these transitional games. He gives Arsenal a little bit more dynamism, but yeah, really interested to see sort of him play a full game or 60 minutes for Arsenal and sort of what his service looks like and sort of what his characteristics look like, because it doesn't appear that Mikel Arteta is trying to coach him into a penalty box number 9. A lot of drifting runs outside the box into these channels. So whether or not that'll be something we keep an eye on in the weeks coming, but yeah, that was Victor Gyokeres' debut. Right, and that's it for today. If you did enjoy, please don't forget to like, comment, and follow the channel. And let us know what you made of both teams after this game this weekend. And we'll see you next time on the Overlap Breakdown. Thank you.